In today's video, I'm going to be talking about Wilson Fisk by request, and yes, this is another Daredevil related video. But I also decided that I wasn't just going to talk about Wilson Fisk, I was going to make comparisons about what I find to be the most interesting aspects of a good villain. First off, Wilson Fisk, he's definitely a unique villain, I think, for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think he is the most well-fleshed out villain that they've had since it began in 2008. The reason why I say that is because not only does he have that moral ambiguity, which I've always found to be essential to a really good and really interesting villain, but also you get to see the full spectrum of his personality. You get to see everything. You get to see his sensitive side, his childhood, his trauma. You get to see the highs of his criminal empire and the lows. I mean, it's a full-rounded 360-degree story. For comparisons, I'm going to mention several other villains I think that are similar in certain ways to the way Wilson Fisk is written in Netflix's Daredevil. First off, Ozymandias in Watchmen. I definitely think Ozymandias is very similar in that he and Fisk feel morally in the right. They don't feel like the bad guy. They feel like this is what they have to do to ensure peace and prosperity. Basically, Ozymandias' goal was to save humanity from itself. And for those of you who have not read or watched Watchmen, first off, what are you doing with your life? And secondly, this is going to be a bit spoilery, but basically, his master plan, the series is set in a dystopian version of the 80s, with nuclear war, basically impending doom. Like, it's almost guaranteed that America is going to go into a nuclear war with Russia. So he decides that he needs to unite the world with a common enemy. And he does so by manipulating everyone and killing a lot of people. And I mean a lot. He implodes New York City, which kills millions and millions and millions of people. But he does it in a way that it unites the world and that they completely feel and believe that they need to stop this threat. And the threat is Dr. Manhattan, which is who he makes them all think is responsible for imploding all of New York City. But when in actuality, not at all. It was all Ozymandias. Yeah, he does that to avert nuclear war, which on paper, you're like, yeah, averting nuclear war, I mean, that probably saved billions and billions of lives. But he killed millions of people to do it, and that's not good. No. That still makes him an evil bastard that you don't really want to invite over for dinner. Another villain that I think is very similar is the main villain of Dan Brown's Inferno, Bertrand Zobrist. Do not get on my ass about how much you hate Dan Brown. I don't fucking care. I like a good thriller, and he writes good thrillers. So basically, in Zobrist, he's obsessed with sustainability, and he is terrified and is completely convinced that the world is no longer going to be able to sustain the massive growth of the population. I mean, we have 8 billion people on planet Earth with hundreds of millions of people being born every single day. It's terrifying. And he's also obsessed with the bubonic plague and with Dante's Inferno. Ooh, worked in the title. But, yeah, so basically his master plan is that there needs to be a new plague in order for there to be a renaissance. Because with the bubonic plague, you know, 1/3 of the world's population was killed, but right after, we have the Renaissance. He decides that, yeah, we need a new plague to thin the herd and make things better. But isn't revealed until it's already enacted. Which he does is he unleashes a plague that actually renders 1/3 of the Earth's population sterile. And not only that, but it's actually I think it changes the DNA of those affected to where only 1/3 of their children can reproduce. And obviously, it's a big moral debate because while he doesn't kill anyone, he's actually taking the choice and option of having children away from people that could have wanted children. That's a major moral debate because he doesn't actually kill anyone, but it's questionable his means and methods of what he has done. I was obviously with Ozymandias as well, and with Wilson Fisk's plan of saving Hell's Kitchen. And he does so in very questionable ways. Basically, to him, you have to destroy Hell's Kitchen to rebuild it. What I wanted to say about Wilson Fisk, especially, I think his arc is absolutely fantastic. I think he is the most well-developed Marvel villain that we've had in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, period. I'm kind of afraid to admit this, but I'm not a big Loki fan. I don't understand the appeal of MCU's Loki. I don't think he's particularly well developed. I think he's petty, and I don't understand his reasonings for why he does what he does, and I especially don't understand why he's somehow taken over the entirety of the Thor franchise and why he was the big bad, well, the visual big bad that took up the most screen time in Avengers. And yeah, I know I'm probably going to get hate on it. I don't care. Fisk is different. I think he really is a rich and fully realized villain that we haven't experienced in the MCU yet. And he's actually the most comic book of a villain that we've had so far because he's so developed. I mean, comic books is a medium that's been around. I mean, we have characters that are 70 plus years old. That is 70 plus years of story after story after story. I mean, it's longer than soap operas. So, I mean, we've seen every facet that you can possibly imagine of all these characters. So you do actually know the full life story of all of these villains, which is what makes them so scary, I personally find. I think it's scarier when you do know how a villain came to be. Some people don't agree with me, like Bryan Fuller. With Wilson Fisk, I've got to say Vincent, and I'm going to mess this up, I know I am, Vincent D'Onofrio? Is the actor that plays Wilson Fisk is phenomenal. He does a spectacular job, and his character, he really does have to play the full spectrum, because there's Fisk the monster and then there's Fisk the child. And I want to bring up a quote that he said about Wilson Fisk. He said, "Our Fisk is a child and a monster. Every move he makes and everything he does in our story comes from his foundation of morality inside himself." And I think that's really interesting, and that's definitely something I wanted to touch on to begin with, and I stumbled upon that quote as I was already planning in my head what I was going to write about. Fisk does not believe himself to be the villain. He believes himself to be the hero. My favorite moment in the entire series is in the finale when he does that speech about the Good Samaritan when he's in the back of the FBI car. And he says that he originally believed he was the Good Samaritan in the story in the Bible. That's because he loved his city and he loved his people and he wanted to take care of his people. And that's much the same thing that Fisk truly believed. He was completely honest when he spoke in with the news media, when he was saying that he was going to rebuild Hell's Kitchen. He was honest. He was not lying. He was telling the truth. In his mind, he was going to repair Hell's Kitchen and make his beloved city be repaired and restored into the manner that he saw fit. He realizes along the way that maybe he's not the Good Samaritan. Maybe he's not going to save his city. And during his speech, which I adore and I definitely think is one of the best scenes of the series, he says, "Funny how even the best of men can be deceived by their true nature." He realizes in that moment that he's not the Good Samaritan, that he's the ill intent, that he's the one that's destroying his beloved city, not saving it. He accepts that he's the villain, and that's a terrifying and brutal moment. And it definitely is going to shape what we see of Fisk as the series progresses, hopefully. I really hope we don't have to wait for season 2. One thing I wanted to talk about, and yes, this is where I'm going to get into a comparison with Hannibal. Some people believe that villains shouldn't have their pasts explored, that they should remain enigmatic, much like Bryan Fuller believes with Hannibal Lecter. He said that he's not a fan of Hannibal Rising, the origin novel and the movie. He wasn't a fan of it because he thought that how Lecter became to be Hannibal the Cannibal, that it defanged him. And I think that's bullshit. I think that's bullshit, and I think it's lazy writing. You can definitely still be terrifying, even knowing that this villain has suffered some trauma. In Lecter's origin story, his family gets murdered by Nazis when he's just a child, and he's basically destroyed by what happens. It destroys his faith in God and in humanity. He actually is rendered mute for about 10 years after it occurs. Basically, it consumes him, his quest for revenge. He needs to go and kill the Nazis that killed his family. The funny thing is, if I wouldn't have mentioned a name, if I would have just told you that origin story, you probably would have thought that this is the origin to some vigilante hero or a superhero. Yeah, it sucks and it's sad that his family was murdered in front of him, but, you know, he chose to kill and eat people. He very well could have also turned into a superhero vigilante of justice. He could have been Batman, but he wasn't Batman. He's Hannibal the Cannibal. That makes sense, and I think in knowing his origins, it actually makes him scarier, because we know what happens, and we know that he knows full well that what he's doing is not the right thing, but he's gonna fucking do it anyway because he's Hannibal fucking Lecter, and that's basically his attitude to most things. I think it would be hilarious if anyone told me that Wilson Fisk was, you know, just some cuddly little teddy bear, and oh, I can't see him being evil now because, you know, he was physically and mentally abused by his father and then killed his father when he was 12. And his mother helped him hide the body. That's a sad story. It's very sad. It also does not at all justify any of the actions that he took, and it doesn't justify how he became the man he is today. In order to be a villain, you have to want to be a villain. There has to be some part of you that's just like, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to kill people, and I'm gonna make lives miserable, and that's what I'm gonna do with my life. You know, because again, villain backstories are extremely similar and sometimes almost exactly the same as superhero origin stories. There are two types of people. You can have something fucking terrible happen to you and go, you know what, I'm gonna make sure that nothing terrible like this happens to anyone else. Or something terrible happens to you, and you go, you know what, fuck the whole fucking planet. If anyone gets in my fucking way, they're getting a bullet between their eyes. Basically, I think Wilson Fisk is marvelous. I think he is, I made that pun. I think he's wonderful, and I think he's extremely well developed. I think he's portrayed magnificently, and I love that they completely fleshed out his character. I like that you get to see his relationships. I like that you get to understand that he's physically and mentally abused as a child, that his father Bill was just horrific. I like to see that his mother actually helped him cover up the body and is aware of some things, but it affected her deeply in other ways, and that's why she's in the state that she is. I like the relationships that he has with the only people he considers close to him, Wesley, his right-hand man, and Vanessa, his girlfriend and future wife. And the way he speaks with Vanessa and with his mother and with Wesley's corpse, it's that soft, childlike voice. And you can see, and especially that scene where he's looking into the mirror and the reflection looking back at him is actually his 12-year-old self covered with his father's blood. I think that really shows his mental state. That he's never really grown up. I think he's still that scared, terrified little boy that just killed his father. And he didn't just kill it for self-defense. He killed Bill because he wanted to fucking do it. You know, it felt good. And he realized it felt good and it felt powerful and that he wanted some of that power for himself. That's my opinions on Wilson Fisk. I hope I got some of you guys thinking more critically about villains, and that villains can be just as interesting, sometimes even more so, than their hero counterparts. Leave a comment below if you've got any criticisms of anything I've rambled about tonight, and also any suggestions for any future videos. Like I promised in the last one, I'm pretty sure the next video I'm going to do is going to be my Funko Marvel subscription box, Collector Core. The first box comes in, they should be shipping it any day now, and I'm praying that it'll come in before Age of Ultron. So yeah, I'm definitely gonna do an unboxing video of that because I've gotta see that Hulkbuster pop. I'm so excited. The thing weighs like 1.5 pounds. It's crazy. It's like, yeah. So other than that, yeah, have a good day, guys.